Thanks for joining us, folks, on a fan through service, a V2VG video podcast.
Absolutely.
We're trying to make this one an audio podcast, too. I've been very remiss on doing it in the past because I'm just a space shot that's not doing it. But this one's going to be a little bit more serious than maybe our last one. We're going to try to branch out and get into an area where we're not really experts per se, or not even per se at all, but it's an important topic.
Yeah, and I think it goes to without saying, anybody who has not been following us definitely need to know that we do not push any political agenda or religious agenda.
Right.
It is typically just two guys' opinions, take it or leave it. Specifically with this topic, I think is really important when everything nowadays is a political issue.
Sure. And the other thing is, we've mentioned before, we don't speak for our organization. We don't speak for Veterans to Veterans Group. We speak for ourselves. It's just, like Chuck said, it's two guys having a conversation. We're trying to give you some information out there. And the biggest takeaway is, whatever you get from our conversations, do your research. If you think we're full of shit, do your research yourself and come to your own conclusions.
And I think that's the key, right? So, I mean, everything going on today with viruses and stuff, one of the things I think we were hoping to do is be able to reteach ourselves and our audience some history of American issues with different viruses in the past, and the way we have appropriately or inappropriately have dealt with them.
Yeah,
and how
there's been both.
And how we can learn from that to get to a better place in time today.
Yeah, and it is a contentious issue, especially in the time of COVID, and which we are in, and there are people on both sides of the issue of the vaccine and the face masks, and it's a very contentious issue because and there's a lot of information, and part of the problem, I think, is that because of the media. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
The media is just pounding this issue, and it makes it front and center for everybody all the time. Whereas in days past, the media wasn't available or it wasn't able to continuously bring this to your front. We know people, particularly elderly people, who watch TV and they're constantly bombarded by this COVID-19 stuff, and they are scared because the media spins it so negatively, typically, that for ratings, let's be honest.
But no, of course,
for ratings,
right?
That they're scared to go out and do things, and the media only gives typically one side of the story.
And the thing is, too, is in the past, when it comes to community health on the scale of the United States, it has not at any time before now been such a politically driven thing. So it's not just the media, but you have both sides of the political parties pushing back and forth, and neither one are actually getting to the heart of the problem.
And let's be honest, the American government has a very bad track record of doing things for the public health. And what we're talking of specifically is the Tuskegee study, the Tuskegee experiment, which happened from 1932 all the way as recently as 1972. And we're going to talk about that more in another episode.
Yeah, I think that's really a great topic to talk about, because
if you don't know what that is, look it up.
But that's
Tuskegee.
Different from what we're trying to talk about today.
But what my link was, that the track record of our government doing things for public health isn't the best.
Yes.
So there's a lot of mistrust with the government and with the CDC. So where do we want to start overall with
Why don't we start with the basic of what is the difference between a virus and a bacteria?
So we know COVID-19 is the 19th strain of the coronavirus, the SARS, whatever coronavirus. So let's see what it is.
So the biggest difference between a virus and a bacteria, and we talked about this earlier, where some scientists believe viruses are alive and some believe that they're not living organisms or whatever. The case is, a bacteria is a living on its own organism that can survive inside of a host or outside of the host on its own.
Yeah.
And that's why you can see bacteria typically go from different species to other species.
Yeah.
With the virus can live outside of the host's body for a very short amount of time, and typically you do not see a specific virus going from many different types of species.
Yeah. And the thing with the virus is, some scientists say viruses meet the criteria for it to be living, and some scientists say viruses do not meet the criteria to be living. They don't breed like bacteria do. They replicate within the host cells.
Which is a great example of the scientific method at work and at its best, right?
Yep.
Because it's still a constant argument in the classical sense.
Sure.
And that's a good thing, because that means we're trying to find the truth of it. And
exactly.
That's our goal for today, is to be able to provide some information that is truthful for everybody to make their own decisions. Again, we're not pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine. We are pro giving you some information to move forward so you can make the best decision for you and your family.
Right. And we're just doing the best we can.
You know,
but like I said in the beginning, look it up for yourself.
No, and absolutely.
Seriously, look it up for yourself. This is a big issue. It's a hot button issue, and I highly encourage it. So, what do you want? So we've gone over the difference between a bacteria and a virus, as far as they both can infect you, they both can make you sick.
Yes.
You can treat a bacterial infection with antibiotics, typically.
Yes.
A viral infection, there are very limited ways to treat it, because most of the time...
To treat it once you have it, but the best way to treat it is the antivirus or a vaccine. Once it's been proven to work. But even then, you still have side effects with, certain people or... age groups.
Let's go over the vaccine real quick. So a vaccine, the standard vaccine, the gold standard for a vaccine, a viral vaccine, right, is the makers of the vaccine get a weakened or dead virus that they inject into your body. Your body has an immune reaction to it, builds up antibodies. So the next time you're introduced to the active virus, you have antibodies built up to it, you fight it off. Now, the COVID-19 vaccine is different. It's called an mRNA vaccine. It's a messenger ribonucleic acid vaccine. It has been studied for the flu, Zika, rabies, and cytomegalovirus before. But it is, according to the CDC, still very much a new type of vaccine to protect against infectious diseases. This is straight from the cdc.gov website. It teaches our cells how to make a protein, or even just a piece of a protein, that triggers an immune response inside of our bodies. The benefit of an mRNA vaccine is that it gains protection without ever having to risk the serious consequences of getting sick with COVID. And it's a new approach to vaccines that triggers an immune response. There's a few of them, but right now, there's a few COVID-19 vaccines, and they're more or less efficacious against the original COVID-19 and the variants that are coming out. But here's the thing. According to my research from the World Health Organization, the CDC, the COVID vaccines are between 94 and 98% effective. That's from Harvard Med and COVID vaccine. So it's more of a treatment and a semi-vaccine. And here's the thing, depending on which one you get, right?
Because there's the one shot, and then there's A and B.
So there's Johnson & Johnson, there's Moderna, and there's Pfizer, and then there's European variants of the vaccine.
Which is confusing on its own, to be honest.
It is confusing, because you're like, well, which one do I get? Some are more effective against the Delta and the Alpha variant, some are less effective. So when you go to get a vaccine, which one do you take? Right now, as of, what are we on, the 11th of August?
Yes.
August 11th, 2021. The vaccines in the United States of America have not been FDA approved. They are authorized for use under an emergency authorization. Now, the FDA approval is expected to be given, but it's not guaranteed and it's not given. So there have been trials of the vaccine, but it's not an established vaccine. It has not a long-standing vaccine. So there's a lot of people who say, yeah, but it's still sort of in the trial phase. So it's not just anti-vaxxers who don't want the vaccine. Right?
And the interesting part, and we talked about this the other day, is that in order for the FDA to have even given its approval to this point, there had to be a small print aspect where the hospital or the organization that is giving the antiviral not be able to be sued if anything happens
it goes wrong.
negatively.
And the other thing is the manufacturers can't be held liable.
And so that should throw some red flags up in general if you're looking into the research, because that puts you in a very bad spot if something does happen.
And we've known some people
personally
who've had some reactions to the vaccine, and one or two who've had fatal reactions suspected from the vaccine. Yeah, they're outliers. We get it, and it can happen with any vaccine.
Yes, absolutely.
We're just saying, we're giving you the information. You make up your own mind, right? We know somebody who has the vaccine, is happy with the vaccine, but will not and does not want to make the vaccine available for his child, because, as he says, he's willing to take the risk, to assume the risk for himself, but he doesn't want to assume the risk for his child because, one, it's not known, and two, it's still a very new vaccine. I'll give you my personal view on the vaccine. Because it's new, I don't want to take the vaccine, and I'm not going to take the vaccine until it's been established for a year or two and the bugs have been worked out of it, and then I'll consider it. Because
no pun intended.
No pun intended. Because I just don't feel comfortable with a largely untried vaccine. I want to see what happens over the long haul. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not a person who says no to vaccines. I believe in herd immunity only. No, I have vaccines. I have a lot of vaccines. First of all, I had vaccines normally. Second of all, I was in the Army, and they gave us so many vaccinations it was literally pouring out of our arms.
We may have gotten the vaccine for COVID at that point, right?
So by no means am I an anti-vaxxer, but I also don't want to take an unnecessary risk in my personal view.
And I agree.
And I believe I have that right.
Yeah, and I agree a lot. And one of the things, and as you mentioned, being veterans and in the military and all the things we have gotten, one of the things that is bothering me about the way the vaccine is being handled is that it was almost forcefully given to American people first, and now it's getting to a point where it's a very dark alley handshake in the military where you don't have to get it, but if you don't get it, they may force you out, or it may affect your promotion.
As of September, they want everybody to have it in the military, or you're going to get bounced.
So, and that in itself is strenuous on a few reasons.
Yeah.
But typically, if something so worldwide, you would want the group of people to have it first would be the military, because COVID's literally in every country.
It's a pandemic, and we'll talk about the difference between a pandemic and an epidemic. And here's the other thing. You were mentioning, Chuck, off camera and off mic, when was the last time you ever heard of a nation offering financial incentives to get a vaccine? And
our kids work at different places. I won't name the businesses, but one business is offering, what, $200?
$200 to get the shot.
Okay, now to a 16-year-old young lady, that sounds like a very simple, easy deal, like no-brainer. But they don't use their brain anyway. They're thinking about that $200 and what I could get the next thing.
What's the big deal? It's only $200. It's a bribe.
And that is a little frightening. And it's happening in many franchised businesses that are local, like,
and on a larger scale too. Some
Walmart,
states have like a lottery effort,
all those things.
Yeah.
So that's just another thing to consider. So I think that if all things are presented to us as far as pros and cons of getting the actual vaccine, now we can make our own educated guess. But now you start throwing in things like financial incentive and possibly losing your position in the military, or now it's a little bit more similar to a bullying tactic.
It's a very insidious, a very sneaky thing to do.
And again, it's not to say that's exactly what's going on. I think that there are some people in the medical community and some politicians that have our best interest at heart.
Sure,
I think
but
there
not
are
all.
some.
Yeah.
So, but yes, I think that's, there are certain things that are happening that should raise eyebrows at the very least.
At the least. So what I did was I came up with some pandemic studies and mortality rates and things like that. What do you have over for your research?
So what I did, and again, we'll do another podcast video on tuberculosis and on the Tuskegee experiment, which is not to be confused with the Tuskegeean airmen, who probably were part of the experiment.
Those are heroes, World War II pilot heroes.
So, but
no doubt about it.
Tuberculosis, or TB, is a bacteria infection.
Okay.
So it was very deadly, and it's not deadly as quick as a lot of the viruses we've dealt with. Like, it takes years to mutate inside of the body.
It's a respiratory thing. And Doc Holliday had it, and he died from TB.
Yeah, right? And it's something that definitely, it takes a long period of time, and there are many bad things that come with it. So I wanted to bring that. At this point, though, we have vaccines and stuff. Well, antibacteria, not vaccine.
So we have
antiviruses.
treatments for it. Yeah.
So there are things that minimize that to almost a zero death rate at this point, which is good.
Is there a cure for it, or is it just treatments like with HIV/AIDS?
There is no cure.
So like HIV/AIDS, there's no cure for it, but we do have medicine cocktails that can extend your life pretty much to a normal lifespan if you have the money and health coverage for it.
Well, yeah, and more and more is being taught about with HIV/AIDS, where when we grew up, it was don't touch that person, don't go near.
Oh shit, yeah. So and if you contracted it, you were going to die from something.
We weren't being
from
taught.
AIDS. You don't die from HIV, you die from AIDS. But right.
But we weren't taught, probably because they didn't know as much as they do now.
Sure.
So
yeah,
we weren't
That's
taught
fair.
that you can't get AIDS by shaking somebody's hand.
You can't?
No. It has to be a blood
I shouldn't
open wound thing. But there is no actual cure for tuberculosis.
Okay, that's fair.
But I think that's one of the most commonly known things in America that we can toss up in the bacteria
and TB
aspect.
is spread from coughing. Okay, just had a call, but that's okay because we work as we do these podcasts.
Who's got the clap?
Who's got? Not me.
I'm not sure if that's bacterial or virus, but
not sure.
we'll have to
We're
look
just
into
gonna
that
find
one.
that out.
But yeah, so TB is a bacterial. It's very well known in American history. You type in just simply TB, you'll find a bunch of information.
And that is spread through coughing. And matter of fact,
Yes.
a mask would probably, a regular cotton mask would cut down on the spread of it, not inhaling it, but projecting it.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So it can attack any part of the body, such
Okay.
as the kidney, spine,
Really?
and brain. But not everybody, and not everyone infected by TB becomes sick. So
Yeah, I remember in the Army, they gave me a little shot under the arm
Yep.
to see if it bubbled up. I'm sure they did that
Yeah.
to you in the Marine
Yep.
Corps. Yeah.
So, but even with that test, they get quite regular false positives.
Ugh.
So you have to,
Do 'em
but they
again.
give you the medication to make sure that the bacteria is
Sure.
not,
I mean, that's fair. Military has to make sure you're healthy-ish.
Yeah, right. I mean, well, healthy enough to squeeze the trigger, right? I mean,
That's fair. That's
you know,
fair. Yeah.
Otherwise, if you're really sick, they just put you up front as a body bag.
You're a meat shield.
Yeah.
And go.
See,
All right.
there's that, militaristic veteran dark humor. So the virus that I looked up that is very common in the United States is polio.
Was very common. Oh, that was big.
So, and it's still very well known, and I have this right off of the CDC prevention website. So it's cdc.gov/polio/what-is-polio, whatever. So polio is it's a life-threatening disease caused by the polio virus, which is one word, which I never knew that. So it spreads, again, from person to person and can infect a person's spinal cord, causing paralysis, which is huge. Because
very huge. And it was so prevalent back in the day.
And it was, and people were like literally dropping like flies back then.
But we've considered that eradicated now because of vaccines, real vaccines that stop the polio from the polio virus.
So so most people who get infected, such as around 72 out of 100, will not have any visible symptoms. Not visible as far as you actually seeing, but like won't have the coughing, the sniffles, the fever,
asymptomatic asymptomatic stuff.
All these symptoms fall right in that range of a flu because they're all related, being part of a virus.
If you think about it, human beings only have so many ways to show that you're sick anyway, right?
Yeah.
So 72% roughly are asymptomatic, but they still have it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then 25% will have flu-like symptoms, which are the basic sore throat, fever, tiredness, all that stuff.
Yep.
But the paralysis is the most severe symptom associated with polio, and it can lead to permanent disability and death. Between 2 and 10 out of 100 people have paralysis from poliovirus infection, have died. So between 2% and 10% of people who have become infected and I don't know why I'm spacing on the word. I just read it 4 times. Paralysis. So between 2 and 10% of the people who have contracted the virus and become paralysis have ended up dying. So that's still a pretty
2 and 10% mortality rate,
which is a large difference, but under all the circumstances and what happened.
But if you get the vaccine, you have no mortality.
Yeah,
it's because it's a full vaccine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Which is why it's considered eradicated. Period.
But
like smallpox in the United States.
This specifically affected children quite highly.
Children a lot.
And which
really pulls at the American heartstrings.
And it does, and I think that's being kind of used against us because there's no actual scientific evidence to say that COVID-19 is having these effects on children the way that they do on the elderly.
No, it's pretty universal.
So, but
as far as infection rates, yeah.
But yeah, so that's the big one that is a viral from our history.
Yeah.
With the exception of, and I think you actually did a lot more research on it, is the Spanish flu.
So, yeah, the Spanish flu was a big one. So, I looked up the difference between I did the top 5 most deadly pandemics in world history. And so a pandemic is, the definition roughly between a pandemic and an epidemic is a disease, viral or bacterial.
Yeah.
It's basically prevalent worldwide, okay?
Yeah,
and an epidemic.
It's something that cannot be held or pointed to in one area.
And just stays there.
So, for example, we live in New Hampshire. If some disease got out and it stayed within the confound of New Hampshire, it'd be an epidemic.
Yeah.
But once it started to move and to other states or even other countries, then it becomes pandemic because,
That's perfect. So an epidemic is prevalent in a region or in a nation. Pan means, broad. So pandemic is obviously, look at the etymology of the word. So the 5 most deadly pandemics are, number 1 is the Black Death, which is the bubonic plague. You've heard about the Black Death in Europe. That was from 1346 to 1353. The second most deadly pandemic is the Spanish flu. And that was in 1918 to 1920, only 2 years. All right. Then number 3 is Justinian's plague, which was the bubonic plague. Number 4 is HIV, which you die from the AIDS virus,
or
which
other diseases. Yeah.
And AIDS once you get the HIV virus, when it turns into AIDS, you usually die from pneumonia or flu or whatever.
Yeah.
but you die from HIV, complications with HIV. And then the fifth most deadly is the third plague pandemic, which again is the bubonic plague. So really, the most deadly disease, the deadliest pandemic in world history is bubonic plague.
Which is interesting
So,
because
I mean,
that's a virus.
That's bacteria and virus. Yeah.
And that one started with fleas
Yeah.
attaching to rats and then giving the rats, and now the rats
people.
getting on ships and giving it to people.
Yeah.
And back then there were no vaccines. So yes, there was a high mortality rate, but also the only other option to deal with it is once you got it, which we have done with COVID. Once somebody has it, you quarantine them. You separate them.
Yeah.
We set 14 days. I think that's the federal thing right now.
Yes, that's typical of federal.
But outside of that, the only way to beat it is to evolve internally and
the
come
people
with
have to have
natural
herd
immunity.
immunity.
Yeah, and that happened because all of humans were not wiped out.
Right.
I mean,
So I actually have the mortality rates for these things. The bubonic plague, we have a treatment for the bubonic plague. The mortality rate for the bubonic plague, if you're treated for it, right, with a treatment, it's not really a vaccine. It's the same type of treatment that you'd get for the flu or frankly the COVID vaccine right now. The mortality rate, if it's treated, is 10%. If it's untreated, it's
high.
30 to 90% mortality rate.
and
10%
that will-
death rate if you have a treatment, or 30 to 90% death rate if you leave it untreated. You're pretty much almost guaranteed to fucking
But
die.
30 to 90% is a huge gap. And why is that? It's because we, as human beings, maybe not so much on the outside, we're still animals and we still adapt and we still, our bodies have done things in order to survive. So that's why you can have that 30 to 90%.
So the Black Death, being primarily a bacterial infection, we can have that treatment. The Spanish flu from 1918 to 1920, it's an influenza virus, which is, okay.
Most viruses are
There's
actually.
no cure for that as of right now. And that killed, so it has 17 to 100 million dead is what I got. And the mortality rate is around 75%, 50 to 75% mortality rate. And there's no treatment, no cure. Number 3, Justinian's plague, same as number 1 because it's a bubonic plague. Number 4, HIV, there's no cure. But we have treatments that can let people live a long, full life. And most people who live in the Western world who contract HIV end up dying of natural causes because typically you can have medicine. And number 5, the third plague pandemic, again, bubonic plague, 10% mortality rate if you have a treatment, 39% untreated. So we're talking hundreds of millions dead. The bubonic plague killed like 100 million people, 100 million people, 35 million people, 15 million people, and the HIV thing has killed 35 million people and going forward.
Yeah.
And then you have smallpox.
Which we get a vaccine for.
So smallpox has a vaccine, which is it says here 99% effective. So it's prevention. Otherwise, it's a 30% mortality rate. Here's a big one: Ebola. There's no vaccine for Ebola, and it has a 50 to 90% mortality rate.
Very high.
If you get Ebola, there's no vaccine, there's no treatment.
It's much lower contagious rate as well.
It's got a low contagion rate, but if you get it, you're in big trouble. And then you have cholera, which is
the black shits.
The black shits. Cholera, there's no vaccine, but there's treatments for it. Okay, if it's untreated, you have a 25 to 50% mortality rate, and if it's treated, it's a 5 to 10% mortality rate. So obviously there's treatments. Now you get into COVID-19. Untreated, there's a 3.4% mortality rate. Let that hang for a second. I just read you the mortality rates of the top 5 and then 6, 7, and 8.
Treated.
With them being treated, or just if there's a vaccine. Those are the death rates, percentages, right? The COVID-19 virus and all of its variants have approximately, according to the World Health Organization, as of March 3rd, 2020, have approximately a 3.4% mortality rate. Now, the vaccines, according to Harvard Med, are between 94 and 98% effective. So, if you have no vaccine, the mRNA vaccine from COVID, and you get sick, you have a 3.4% chance of dying from it. If you get the treatment, which they call a vaccine, but I'm not a virologist, let's just call it a vaccine. If you get the COVID vaccine, at best it's only 98% effective, and that's just about, at worst it's 94% effective. Remember, there's different variants.
Yeah.
That's pretty much as effective as the mortality rates in reverse. So
yeah,
why take it's tough for me to take a risk of getting a largely untried vaccination for a disease that has a 3.4% mortality rate. It's got a lower mortality rate than the flu.
Yeah, and the one
common
thing,
flu, I mean, like what you get, seasonal flu.
The thing I really want to bring to people's attention is, okay, you look at the COVID-19 situation, but you look at the Spanish flu. Where did the Spanish flu come from? How did it get from point A to America? Well, it was brought over by our soldiers during World War I when they came home. Okay, well, why did they not all die? Well, because they were in country between 3 and 6 years and developed an overall immunity. Yeah. But when they brought it back here, just like when Europeans brought themselves and the Native Americans got all the Western diseases and stuff. So having a mutation inside yourself to create these immunities happens.
It's called herd immunity. It's not.
It happens in history.
It does happen in history. That's why human beings are still here. So some people argue. I actually got into a discussion with somebody last night on Facebook, and they said, well, the most deadly pandemics you looked up, their mortality rates were so high because there's no vaccine. I'm not talking about that. I'm just comparing mortality rate, untreated versus untreated. Yes. You're looking at 30 to 90%, 50 to 90%, versus 3.4%. And I'm not saying people don't die, and I'm not saying that it's not sad when they die. I'm just giving a straight comparison, and what I'm saying is, why is there such a worldwide reaction to a virus that is so highly survivable? I mean, it's not like we have an Ebola pandemic where you're literally walking down the street seeing people falling down, bleeding from the eyes, ears, nose.
Literally being torn inside out, right?
Somebody told me a couple times, if you need the news, right, if you need the media to constantly remind you that there's a pandemic, it's not a pandemic with a capital P.
Yeah. And we're not even talking about any of the variables as far as physical health, age, and all these things either. Those are always variables. And I know
because the mortality rate could go higher. What you're saying, right?
Yeah,
if you have underlying
on who
causes,
you are and
what you're saying in a healthy person, typically standard.
And
we're not making these numbers up. This is from World Health Organization.
Yeah, and you and I both have children, and going back to school soon, and possible shutdown, more masks, all this stuff. But even in the CDC, they specifically say they don't know really any effects that COVID has on children, like pretty much of any age.
It's because it's too new.
So how can
there's a lot of suspected, right?
Yeah.
Things. There's a lot of predicted this, predicted that, and I know an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Look, I get it. I understand people are scared, but I think this whole situation is more about control than the reality of this disease. I feel if this was a pandemic like the Ebola virus or the Spanish flu, which killed, what am I looking at? 17 to 100 million people in the United States in 2 years?
Yeah.
I'm not talking
that's
worldwide.
Where we're at now, right? We're almost at the 2-year mark.
Yeah.
So it really puts things in perspective. But again, like you were saying, an easy way to tell that this is no longer the pandemic with the capital P is in the first year of dealing with things, it wasn't as much of a scare tactic. I mean, there still was a scare tactic, but the way we were measuring these things were in hospitalizations and deaths. So now all the media is pushing.
The tracking was hospitalizations and deaths.
Which are important. Those are the important numbers.
Okay, yeah.
Okay?
All right.
Because that means that they got this virus and they...
It's bad enough to go to the hospital.
And or die.
And or died.
Right?
That's fair.
We moved from that, which is very scientific, good numbers to work with, not good numbers that people are dying, but good numbers to work with scientifically, to cases. Now, the issue with cases is many things. One is, yes, it could be somebody who gets the virus, and so they get tested, they have the virus. It could also be somebody who has the immunity for the virus, shows no symptoms, has to get the test for work, test positive. Lastly, people who have already gotten the vaccine will always test positive. So we can take those three groups of people and put them all in cases, but that's not giving an accurate number of
hospitalizations
of everything that has been going on.
And again, we're talking about a roughly 3.4% mortality rate. So again, tracking the number of cases is disingenuous because, oh, look how many cases there are. Okay, fine. How many of those are strong enough to require a hospitalization? And of the hospitalizations, how many actually died? That's the number we need to be tracking, because if you just track how many people get sick, it's going to be this high.
Yeah.
And you're going to be like, holy shit, there's hundreds of thousands. Okay. But out of 100,000 people who get sick with the coronavirus, how many of them actually died?
Yeah, it's...
This scares you. This, not so much.
And the thing is, too, is...
I'm not saying don't take preventative measures.
Absolutely.
I'm just saying
do your research.
Look at it with clearer eyes.
So, me personally, I've gotten many vaccines. The one that I almost never get is the flu vaccine.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because outside of being fat, I'm a relatively healthy person, and the likelihood of me getting it to a point where it puts me out more than 24 hours is very rare. And the reason I choose not to get it is because every year it changes, which means every year it's a different shot, and that's the same thing with
just
COVID.
Like the coronavirus, right? Because now there's the Delta variant. That means there's the
Delta
Alpha
plus.
variant, Bravo. So see, which vaccine are you going to get? And we did talk about that. There's 3 or 4 vaccines for COVID.
Yeah.
Some are more or less effective against the different variants. So which one are you going to choose?
And again, if you fall in that group that puts you at high risk, like you have some immunity issues because medications you're on, so you may be more likely to take the flu vaccine every year. You know what I mean?
When my wife really pushes it, I do, but I would rather not, because, look, I just don't care. And somebody told me the flu vaccine that they give you is just based on their best guess of which strain is going to hit your region. Because there's a lot of influenza viruses out there. So,
but if you're
it's kind of like speculating on oil prices, right?
if you are in a high risk for either, which actually tends to be the same group of people, the elderly and mostly people who have autoimmune diseases.
Comorbidities, yeah.
So,
look,
yes.
Pneumonia is far more deadly than COVID. I don't see people freaking out about pneumonia.
I mean, if I had MS, or if I had some other autoimmune disease, or if I was not almost 40, which I'm still not as old as you.
Whatever.
Then I would put much more considerate.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm not against people who take the coronavirus vaccine. I want to make that very clear. I am against, I am kind of against anti-vaxxers who take no vaccines, because I think that people who take no vaccines, period, are sort of putting our public safety at risk.
They're not taking their own lives. Like, if we choose to not take a vaccine, we're only putting ourselves at risk.
Yeah,
right?
but all that, like even like polio and stuff, like established vaccines, and this is a different topic, I get it.
Yes.
But I do feel that I am sort of against the anti-vax crowd for many reasons. I don't think that essential oils are going to protect you from these things particularly. It's kind of like putting a Cheeto in a deadbolt and saying, I'm good.
We should try that one time.
Kick the door down.
Do that on the.
I'll eat the Cheeto. I'm fat. Right?
The trailer. See if it works.
We don't have a cotter pan. We have a crunchy Cheeto. But so I am sort of against the anti-vax arguments, but I'm not against the particular anti-vax argument against this particular so-called vaccination. As of right now. And I think I have the freedom to do that. And a lot of people are absolutely for the vaccine. And I'm totally fine with that. What I'm not fine with is when people on either side of this issue attack the person and not their argument.
Absolutely.
When it becomes ad hominem and it's like, if Chuck was for the coronavirus and I was coronavirus vaccine and I was against it, and Chuck was like, Eric, you're an idiot. Then it's like, well, hold on. If he's like, well, I think your argument's stupid. Okay, fine. Now you're attacking my argument. That's different.
Yes, and anybody can look up information and gather this stuff. It's readily available with today's technology.
Yeah.
I mean, some things are going to be a little more difficult to find because it's still so new. You're still going to
finding
struggle
the mortality
with COVID
rate
stuff.
for COVID was a little bit more difficult because there's so much information about coronavirus out there, and some of it's conflicting.
And you got to make sure you don't go to a place like Wikipedia. You need to make sure you go to.
And if you do go to
CDC
Wikipedia,
or
go to their sources to make sure their sources line up.
You want to make sure you go to a medical college or whatever
The
the case
places
is.
I like the most are Harvard Medical, Johns Hopkins University.
I like them as well. Yeah.
The CDC, okay. World Health Organization, okay. Go to a .org or a .gov. I agree with you. .com
Typically,
places. If you go to college online or any college really, most professors are not going to accept as a source a .com. They're gonna want a .edu, or a .gov, maybe a .org, but usually not even that. So if you disagree with what we say or any of our points, let us know. If you think we're stupid, let us know. Especially if you think we're stupid. Say, hey, you guys are fucking wrong, and this is why you're wrong. Because you know what? If you comment and you say you're wrong about X, Y, Z, or all of it, and this is why, we'll do another video and say we were wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
So-and-so gave us this information, it's wrong, and I'll fucking record myself getting the vaccination. I don't care. Prove me wrong.
And again, the whole point was to be able to give you information for you to juggle around with, but also to inform you that the body creating its own immunities happens. It's happened throughout human history. It's something, despite what is being said by either political party says, still happening. So
I just think the knee-jerk reaction. I agree. I think the knee-jerk reaction about this coronavirus pandemic is wrong.
Yeah.
I don't think that we should do nothing about it. We should definitely do something, but I think the knee-jerk reaction is wrong. So
next time we'll have something far more fun and lighthearted, hopefully.
Thanks, guys.